If you thought Zack Snyder had it bad, wait till you hear this. Hello, welcome back to Simon's Rants. I'm Simon, and today I'm ranting about Orson Welles. I was recently actually watching one of his movies, The Stranger, and I was thinking to myself while watching it, if only we had the version of this movie that Orson Welles wanted to make. Because in case you don't know, that movie, along with most of his movies, have been sabotaged. But before I get too much into that, I'm going to give a little background on who Orson Welles actually was, because even though he was a real man, he sounds a bit like a myth. Orson Welles was essentially good at everything he tried. He was a child prodigy when it came to violin and piano. He would also perform magic tricks and entire Shakespearean plays for his teachers and classmates. He'd marry actresses and he'd fight bulls. Later on in life, he became friends with Ernest Hemingway. He'd eat dinner with world powers and presidents.
I remember very well afterwards, Stryker was the leader of the big anti-Semitic campaigns, and the man sitting next to me was Hitler. And he made so little impression on me that I can't remember a second of it.
Gee.
He had no personality whatsoever. I never met Stalin. Roosevelt I knew very well, and Churchill during childhood and then youth, of course.
Before he got into filmmaking, he directed plays and he produced radio programs, most notably the adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. You know, the one that made the whole country freak out, supposedly?
We now return you to Carl Phillips at Grover's Mill.
Ladies and gentlemen, Marion. Ladies and gentlemen, here I am, back of a stone wall that adjoins Mr. Wilmer's garden. From here, I get a sweep of the whole scene. I'll give you every detail as long as I can talk and as long as I can see. More state police have arrived. They're drawing up a cordon in front of the pit. About 30 of them. No need to push the crowd back now. They're willing to keep their distance. The captain's conferring with someone. Can't quite see who. Oh, yes, I believe it's Professor Pearson. Yes, it is. Now they've parted, and the professor moves around one side, studying the object while the captain and two policemen advance with something in their hands. I can see it now. It's a white handkerchief tied to a pole. Flag of truce. If those creatures know what that means, what anything means. Wait a minute, something's happening. A humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobiles spreading everywhere. It's coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill.
And then when he finally did get into filmmaking, his first movie was Citizen Kane, the greatest film of all time. Everything he did was great. As a young man, Orson walked arrogantly into Hollywood, turned up his nose at everybody in power, and then turned around and made the greatest film of all time while simultaneously burning the rule book on how to make movies. He essentially rewrote the book on how to make a movie while not knowing what he was doing or who he was pissing off. And so, this made a lot of enemies. Before he was even done with Citizen Kane, they were already trying to sabotage him. Even though it was written into his contract that he could do anything he wanted to do with the movie, they still tried to tell him what to do, and when that didn't work, they slandered him and his movie in the media. They tried to get dirty pictures of him and some actress, and they tried to do everything that they could to make sure that Citizen Kane wouldn't succeed.
Is it true that the Hearsts tried to actually have the film destroyed before it was...
They tried to have it destroyed. They even tried to frame me. In one town, I was doing some kind of date, I don't know what, bond tour, lecture, some kind of a gig, and I was in a nightclub afterwards. Waiter came up and says, a police officer wants to see you. Well, I tried to hide, because if that ever happens, I'm sure I'm guilty. I don't know how you are about it, but, you know,
absolutely.
The minute I see a cop, I know I did it. Mm-hmm. But there was no way out of it. I had to go see him, and he took me aside, and he said, Orson, I don't know why they always call me Orson. He says, don't go back to your hotel room. I said, why? He says, they've got a miner staked out there and a photographer, with the cops waiting to jump in and arrest me.
And Hollywood didn't even stop when the movie was finished. They kept going. Citizen Kane was nominated for 9 Oscars, and every time its name was mentioned at the Oscars, the entire crowd of Hollywood elitists booed. This film, which won Best Original Screenplay and was nominated for 8 more Oscars, was being booed by every actor, director, writer, producer. Everybody in the audience was booing the greatest film of all time because, frankly, they were jealous. And unfortunately for Orson, it still didn't stop there. For the rest of his career, every movie he made had these problems and more. Orson Welles' next film, The Magnificent Ambersons, had 42 minutes cut off the ending, leaving the film a complete mess with no real ending. He intended the first section to build up to that last 42 minutes, and instead they cut out the 42 minutes and just left in the build up to nothing. His next film, The Stranger, had 30 minutes cut from it, including 19 minutes of expository setup at the beginning of the film. The movie kind of just starts, and it's noticeably choppy throughout. It's still a really good movie, I just wonder how good it could have been if it wasn't sabotaged. Eventually, Welles left Hollywood and began producing and funding his movies on his own, but the problem with that is that he still had a stigma surrounding him and his movies, and actually there was only one movie he ever made that actually made more than it cost to make, being The Stranger. Every other movie he made, he spent more money making it than he earned in the box office. So as Welles kept cutting costs, making lower and lower budget movies, he went deeper and deeper into debt. He was forced to look other places for income. He would act in other people's movies, he would do various projects on the side, act in commercials, anything he could to try to make money and be able to also make his movies. Despite starting countless films, Orson Welles actually only ever finished 10 in his lifetime. And of those 10 films that he did complete, you could argue that only Citizen Kane was completed how he wanted it to be. And it's heartbreaking to say, but most of the original edits and reels are lost forever. In the past 50 years or so, we have found some copies, and we've been able to restore and reimagine some of his films. Orson Welles left extensive notes on what he actually envisioned for these movies to be like, and so film historians have painstakingly reassembled and tried to recreate as best they can his films how they're supposed to be. Touch of Evil and Mr. Arkaden have been reassembled to the best of our ability, and Citizen Kane went mostly untouched, but that's still only 3 of the 10 completed movies that we have, leaving the other 7 to be complete but not really. And when watching these movies, you can tell that they're incomplete. They can still be good, sometimes even great. They're just not what they could have been. And it's amazing to realize when you take Orson Welles' collection as is, not trying to envision what his movies would be like, just taking his movies as what they are. He's still considered one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. He's on pretty much everybody's shortlist. He's easily in the top 10. But he's also easily the most sabotaged filmmaker of all time, at least that we know of. And Hollywood still isn't done. They're still not over it. Just this past Oscar season, guess what won more Oscars than Citizen Kane? The movie about how Orson Welles didn't actually write Citizen Kane. All these years later, Hollywood still cannot admit Orson Welles outdid them. That he did it without their help, he didn't need their help, and he could single-handedly make the greatest film of all time. And it really is just a shame. Orson Welles is the greatest tragedy of Hollywood. As it stands now, he's a top 10 filmmaker of all time. But just imagine what he could have been. If he had the funding or the support or the backing that someone like Hitchcock had. Someone who made dozens and dozens of movies and is considered by many to be the greatest director of all time, and yet is still talked about in the same way that many people also talk about Orson Welles. I think it is fair to say that Orson Welles isn't quite at the Hitchcock level, but it's also safe to say that he's close. So if he's that close, keeping everything in mind about what happened to him and what happened to his career and the fact that he only ever finished 10 films. Just imagine what he could have been. He could have easily been the greatest director of all time. Or maybe he wouldn't have been any better. And that's the shame of it. We'll never know. We know what Orson was able to accomplish given the circumstances that he was dealt, but we'll never ever know what he could have been. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think, and of course don't forget to like, share, and if you're new here, subscribe. I'm Simon from SimonsRants. And that was my rant for today.